What's up? What's up? What's up? This is Rap Sheet Hollywood. We bring you the livest and freshest commentary in Hollywood, but of course, with a hip hop flair. I'm your host, the incomparable Pook Diesel, and today we are doing something really special. We're continuing in on looking at true crime. As you know, I'm also a producer and do some of my true crime producing, and I have a distinguished guest here today, Mr. Greg Mullanax. Greg, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Paul?
I'm doing excellent. I'm doing excellent.
Good.
So we're jumping right into the world of true crime, and there was a case that took place in Las Vegas with one Mr. Ron Rudin. Ron Rudin, rest in peace to Ron Rudin. He was murdered, and as part of his murder, and do you remember the exact year? What was your relationship to the Ron Rudin case?
Ron Rudin, he disappeared in December of 1994. It was about a week or so before Christmas. I think it was the 15th or something like that. And then they found his remains out by Lake Mojave, which is south of Hoover Dam, for anybody familiar with that area. They found his remains out there about 6 weeks later. Some fishermen found him out there in the middle of the night. So they found his skull. And then later, the police went out there and they found the burned area where apparently he was cremated. I'm not totally convinced he was cremated there, but that's what the evidence and so that's when they knew he was dead. Before then, they didn't know what happened, but they knew that he didn't show up for work. He didn't come home. And he didn't use any credit cards or anything like that. Didn't access bank accounts, anything that a normal person would have to do to get by. And then about 4 or 5 days after he disappeared, they found his car parked at the Crazy Horse 2 Saloon, which is a topless joint in Las Vegas. And it was a mobbed up joint, but it was parked behind there. In fact, well, we can get into how it was found and stuff, but that's where they found his car. So they knew his car, he was missing. They found his car, but they didn't find his body till about a month later after that.
Yeah. So, Greg, this is a very interesting case. I had the pleasure of producing this. This is a show. Once again, I want to promote that it's airing. The case, Ron Rudin case, is airing on a show called Blood and Money. Blood and Money is the title that was created. It's under the brand of Law and Order. So Dick Wolf is an executive producer. Of course, we know Dick Wolf from doing, great series in television. And so this is the first time that the brand is actually brought in and out into true crime. And so the case of Ron Rudin is a case, like you said, 1994, was a high profile case in Las Vegas. At this time, he was a well-known businessman. And some people would say that, possibly he was, he would have this bravado about him. He'd wear this black cowboy hat. He would kind of walk along the lines of sometimes, dealing with the not so straight and narrow. And so sometimes he would, in terms of his businesses, he was into developing properties. He was kind of well known for a lot of these different activities. He also was on his fifth marriage, and he met a woman by the name of Margaret, married her, who was also on her fifth marriage. This case was really fascinating. I was just happy to be able to produce this episode. I got to meet people like yourself, Greg, and a number of others, JB Cassell, people who were associated with this case. So for those that don't know, Greg, give a little bit of a background about yourself. You are a defense attorney. Just tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to represent Margaret.
Well, excuse me. I'm currently an attorney in Fresno, California, but I grew up in Texas. I grew up in Arlington, Texas, which is home of the Dallas Cowboys and Texas Rangers and all that stuff. That's our claim to fame. Eventually came to law school out in California, and I used to practice law in Nevada. My first job after law school was in the Attorney General's office there. So I got familiar with Nevada, but that was back in the early 90s. Shows how old I am now. But so I used to have a lot of cases down in Las Vegas and Reno and places like that. And so I do mostly employment law now. I do a lot of constitutional law also. But I just happened to see Margaret's case. and I didn't have any relationship with her beforehand. I wasn't really involved in her trial. I got involved in the appeal process. So I just happened to read her case one day that came out of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. That's how I got involved in her case. But I used to practice criminal law a lot, mostly in Texas. I'll still take cases now if I think someone's getting railroaded or there's a special circumstance in a case that I think I can help them. I'll take cases like that, especially the wrongful. When I think someone's innocent, I'll definitely take a case like that. I don't think I would ever turn away a case if I thought someone was innocent. Or getting railroaded by the DA's office or something.
So really interesting about this particular case. We have a gentleman who's fairly successful as a businessman. He marries Margaret. They're both on their fifth marriage. The marriage does well, but then soon after, there's some trouble in paradise. The marriage, there's rumors of infidelity. There's stories of the two of them having some disagreements. From the facts, I believe that there was a previous incident where police were called out to the house because of some domestic issues. But Ron is found to be murdered. Tell us what you know in terms of the facts of the case, what led you to be a person that felt like you needed to help out and represent Margaret as she was now being charged with the murder of Ron Rudin.
Well, what attracted me to her case, I'll just give you a little background on that, was back in September of 2014. I actually had a trial starting here in Fresno that was going to go on for 2 or 3 weeks. And it was, I think, the Thursday or Friday before it was starting. And I got online to check the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals website to see if there's any new case law that might affect my case or something like that. Well, I saw a case from Nevada about a murder. And I thought, well, that looks interesting. So I just literally downloaded it, sent it to my printer, went to the printer, picked it up and grabbed some coffee and came back and sat right here at my desk. And I started reading it and I couldn't believe what I was reading. But it mostly had to do with attorney negligence and indifference to Margaret's case and the court's indifference to Margaret's case and the procedure that she had to go through. She did not have a fair trial and she did not have a fair appeal. Her first, the appellate process is complicated, but at one level of her appeal, she got appointed and a court appointed attorney to handle her appeal, and he never filed anything. And then he later got replaced, but when he didn't file anything, they blew the statute of limitations on it. So at that point, the courts denied her applications. So the opinion I read, it had gone, then it went over to federal court. The court said, no, too bad, so sad, you didn't file your papers on time. Then it went up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit opinion that I read said, oh, this is a horrible case, it's probably injustice, but we can't let your case go forward. That's what made me mad. I mean, I just was livid. I couldn't believe it. I had to read it 3 or 4 times. I was bugging April, my paralegal. I went in her office, I was like, you can't believe this. And I was reading all this stuff. And so that's kind of how I got involved. And I'll just say this, when I first got involved, I had no idea whether she was innocent or guilty. And at that point, I didn't care because all I knew was that she didn't have a fair trial. And I live in Central California. We have prisons all over the place. We have Corcoran Prison down here. We have Tehachapi down the road. I mean, we've got them all over the place. And I want to feel comfortable driving by these prisons that the people that are in there should be in there. Not because that they all had fair trials or fair processes or whatever. So, and the older I get, the more concerned about this I get. But anyway, that was the genesis of it. And, but then I met with Margaret and I agreed to represent her if she got a new trial, but at that point I didn't think she would get one. But I got the trial transcripts and I put them on my iPad, and I was going to Texas for a week. And I remember sitting there in Texas reading this trial transcripts. And about halfway through, I started thinking to myself, man, I don't even think she did it. I mean, you know what? I was just like, they haven't shown any proof of anything. And so that really irritated me. And so I really got into it then. And then finally she talked me into representing her on her appellate case. So eventually the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals changed their mind, which hardly ever happens. A few months later, they rescinded their decision, issued a new decision, replacing the previous one, and said her case could go forward. So at that point, the state tried to appeal to the Supreme Court. Of course, we opposed that because we didn't want the Supreme Court getting involved, because the Supreme Court is notorious for being tough on habeas cases. So if you've been convicted in a trial, it's almost impossible to get it overturned, even if you didn't have a fair trial. I mean, it's not easy. You'd think it should be easier, but it's not. But anyway, the Supreme Court declined to take it, which I didn't think they would. And then it came back to the district court in Las Vegas. But anyway, while I was working on this, so we got to file an amended appeal. And that's ultimately resulted in her conviction being overturned. But that's when I had to dig into the case, and look at all the evidence, go through the trial transcripts, look at everything involved in the case. I spent hours and hours and hours going through this thing. And the more I went through it, I just thought, I cannot believe they got a conviction on the evidence that they had. And the reason they did was because she had an inept lead trial attorney in her trial. And there's no, you can look at her. I posted his opening statement on the video of it on YouTube. You can go watch it, and it's a sad thing to see, man. I mean, it's unbelievable. But that's what got me in the case. And it's one of these cases that you can think about for days and days and go down different rabbit holes. I mean, it's the craziest case I've ever seen.
Greg, I got to commend you because, you have represented yourself as being a very, caring, stand up, straightforward type of lawyer and attorney. And that is commendable in these days. And so for you to see a possible injustice with Margaret and her case, and the representation that she previously had, and then to take it upon yourself to say, hey, I want to try to do what I can do. And I believe it was pro bono at that time. Like, you did this just out of the kindness of your heart. I mean,
oh yeah, she had no money. She was in prison.
Wow.
But she had no money. But it was one of those things where, if you drive, sometimes you'll see a case and it just gets under your skin. And this was one of those that just, for some reason, I couldn't believe it. And I think it was because of all of the attorney ineptitude and then the judicial indifference, which judges mean, like, for example, I think the judge, the trial judge, after he saw that opening statement, this is a big trial at the time in Las Vegas. It was what everybody was talking about. It was on court TV. It was broadcast on local over the air TV. And he should have, on his own motion, should have declared a mistrial, because there's no way you could have a fair trial after that opening statement. I mean, there's just no way, because those prosecutors in Las Vegas, they were competent attorneys. They knew what they were doing. And compared to her attorney, it was night and day. And so I think that's what torpedoed her case. It just wasn't worked on. And, this could happen to anybody. That's the thing. People, sometimes they'll make fun of me. Why would you get involved in something like that? Well, first of all, I didn't really know what I was getting involved with. I had no idea that we'd be here 7 or 8 years later talking about this. Okay. Right. I mean, I just had no idea at the beginning, but it's, I don't know. It just got under my skin and it really bothered me, and it still does. I still get worked up about it when I think about it.
Well, I wanted to commend you. I want to just dig just a little bit deeper in the case. And of course, you were, the appellate attorney, and that, allowed her to have her case vacated, which she had already served her time, served a lot of time, 20 years, I believe. And she also, she had been presented with some options of, taking a plea deal, which would have significantly shortened her sentence. But she maintained her innocence and said that she definitely had nothing to do with the murder of Ron Rudin. And so because of that, she served 20 years. And for you to be able to come in and then actually by the law have that case vacated. I believe she wasn't exonerated, though, but she was vacated. You want to talk about the specifics on what you were able to achieve?
Sure. When I first started the case, she was still serving time. I didn't know, because this was back when I first met her. It was early 2015, I think. I'd communicated with her by mail and stuff, but anyway, one day I went out there to visit her at the prison in Las Vegas. But so she was incarcerated, and we didn't know when she would, if she'd get out on parole or what the deal was. That really, didn't even think about it much at the time. But as time went on, and then she actually got out on parole when she was up for parole, mostly because of her age. She was in her 70s. She had a clean record before. She'd never been arrested for anything before. So when you look at those factors that the state has to determine whether someone should be eligible for parole or not, she met all the factors. So she should have been released. So I wasn't surprised that they released her. But I'd never seen a case like this, a murder case where you actually serve your time and get out of prison and your appeal is still going on. You might see it in some lower level kind of criminal cases, where you're in for 3 or 4 years or something like that, and your case drags on, but not in a murder case where you serve for 20 years. That's what was crazy. So when she got out in January of 2020. It was just before COVID, all that stuff started. And I remember thinking, man, who would have ever thought that she's going to get out before this process is still going on? And then, of course, COVID hit, which dragged it out for, I'm sure that affected the federal courts, caseload and everything. But it was a crazy process. I mean, so the court overturned her conviction. And so the court gave the DA's office 30 days to decide whether or not they wanted to prosecute her again, because they could have tried her again. And they decided not to. And then the state could have appealed it. The court gave them 30 days to appeal the court's decision overturning her conviction, and they chose not to pursue that. So right now, under the eyes of the law, she's innocent. But you're right, the judge did not declare her innocent. It was the point of the whole matter was that she had ineffective assistance of trial counsel, and so it wasn't a actual innocence claim. Sometimes, you can go into the federal court and say, we have new DNA evidence or something that points to someone else, that kind of thing. And you can argue actual innocence. In this case, it was a case of ineffective assistance of counsel.
Yeah. Just looking at the case, and I know you said there were a couple things that when you actually were reviewing her case in the beginning, you could tell there were a number of things that kind of jumped out to me about this case. One being that there was some infidelity within the marriage.
Right.
And it did come out in court records that Margaret was eavesdropping on Ron, and that she had some listening devices and things in place at his work office, and was kind of listening in. But one of the main witnesses was actually her sister, who went on court on trial and testified to really kind of railroading Margaret a little bit. And so, I think that kind of weighed a little bit heavy on the jury, the fact that someone's own sister would testify against her. Talk about that, and what are some of the things that, when you saw this information, it kind of led you to say, I don't even think she did it, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think her sister's named Donna, and her sister did come in, and I always kind of referred to her when I was working on the case as the bad sister, the bad sister, whatever. She came in, and I think I heard from people I believe are credible that she was having an affair with one of the investigators in the case, but I don't know that for a fact, but that's out there. Wouldn't surprise me. But anyway, she was definitely in with the prosecutors, and she came in and testified against Margaret. She said stuff like the day or so after Ron disappeared, or a couple days after, they went to his office and were looking through his papers. Well, people do that when someone dies. They look to see if there's life insurance. They look to see if there's a will. They look for things like that. So that's not unusual, but they pumped it up to try to make it look like it was some kind of sinister thing. And so when it really wasn't, and Margaret and her sister had a stormy relationship their whole lives. So this wasn't like they were cozy, sisterhood, strong sisterhood and everything. And all of a sudden one of them broke away and said, oh my God, my sister's a murderer. So it was a crazy thing that went on for all these years. So that was one aspect about the case. There's some other aspects. I don't know if you want to get into them, but what I had problems with is they never could really establish the time that Ron died, or where they said that he was shot in the bedroom, and they said they found a couple of specks of blood like on the ceiling or whatever. Well, a couple of days after, well, first of all, let me start at this point. They first made a big deal about Margaret didn't go to the police and report that he was missing. Well, she did contact Metro Police and she told them that her husband hadn't come home. And they said, well, you got to wait 48 hours. You know, he's an adult male. People do this kind of stuff all the time. So we don't start an investigation after 48 hours. And then when he didn't show up for work, the employees got concerned. And so a couple of the employees went down to Metro. They just went there to the office and they filled out a report. So they made it sound like Margaret didn't report anything, which is not true. Then some missing persons detectives showed up at her house a couple of days later and they asked, can we search her house? And she said, sure. So they went and they looked in the house, or looking for anything that's out of place or anything that would suggest, you know, a crime or, you know, like blood or anything like that. They go in his bedroom. They don't see anything in there. They look under his bed. They don't see big blood stains or anything like that anywhere in the bedroom. They go in the bathroom. They don't see blood anywhere there, and they leave. And then later on, after his body was found, well, before his body was found, probably a couple of weeks after that, I think in early January of 1995, there was an ad put in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the local newspaper, and it said, I can't remember, I think that the reward was $25,000, but there was a reward for information leading, you know, to finding for information about Ron Rudin's disappearance. And so there was a handyman that Margaret hired to help her do Christmas decorations, because Ron disappeared right before Christmas. She wanted to have Christmas with her, you know, grandkids were there and stuff. So she wanted to have a Christmas tree. So she got this guy to come in and, you know, decorate a tree and do some things like that. And then he later claimed that he helped her do some things in the bedroom also. And then he later went to the police after that thing came out, that reward thing came out, and said, hey, I was taking carpet out of her bedroom and I saw all these big old blood stains and all that stuff. And I went in the bathroom and there was like this red liquid that was bubbling up from the bathtub drain and all this kind of stuff. And which is preposterous because the Metro detectives had already been there. They'd looked under the bed. They'd seen the bathtub. They'd seen everything. And so
Greg, this handyman, he also had a sketchy background as well, as being formerly incarcerated, and you know he wasn't necessarily the most credible witness, but yet when you have this reward for information around here, he definitely wanted to claim that reward. It's funny because as a producer on this case, you know, I have to go through all these different scenarios, and it's just unveiling the layers, one by one, and it became pretty sketchy, but yet it was mind-boggling to think about all of the different factors that came into play. So when this handyman, he comes forward after the house has already been searched by the police, now he comes and says that there was blood. The interesting part about it, and you can continue on, is the blood that they did see actually was from a murder. Well, I wouldn't say a murder, but a death of Ron's third wife years prior. So you continue on. I don't know if that's where you were going with it, but yeah, okay.
No, that's a good point, because in that bedroom, Ron lived in a very modest home. He had all this real estate and he had money and everything. But he lived in a very modest home behind his strip mall that he owned on Charleston Boulevard there in Las Vegas. But in this bedroom that he lived in since 1964, I think it was his third wife. Her name was Peggy Rudin. Well, she allegedly committed suicide in that bedroom, shot her head off with like a 350, what is it, 357 Magnum, one of those big ass guns.
Yeah.
And the police report said her head from this point to the top was just blown off.
Wow.
And so debris, brain, skull fragments, hair, blood, everything was all over the walls and all over the ceiling. So when they come in, after they found Ron's body, the police came out again and searched the house. This is when they were going after Margaret. They went out and brought the crime scene people out there and everything, and they searched the room, and they said they found a speck of blood on I think a fire alarm thing or something, and maybe a speck over here and a speck over there. And then they found some brain matter up there. Well, that brain matter on the ceiling was from Peggy Rudin. They'd been up there for like 14 years. And so, and then they did a luminol test, where that's a presumptive test to test for blood. That stuff they spray and it turns purple. It could be blood, not necessarily, but it could be. So they sprayed it on the wall. Well, they said it lit up like a Christmas tree. Well, of course it did, because his third wife shot her head off in that room. And then they found a couple of specks of blood and they said it was Ron's DNA. And, you know, that doesn't prove anything because he lived there since 1964. This is 30 years later. I challenge anybody to go into someone's room that's been there for 30 years and see if they can't find that person's DNA anywhere. I mean, it's like, you know, for crying out loud. And so they made it sound like she shot him in the head while he was laying in bed, and there's blood splatter on the wall. There wasn't blood splatter. Margaret did have a good blood expert. That was one good thing they did. He came in a blood spatter expert. He said the amount of blood they found was less than a drop. So that doesn't indicate anything like that. So it's just the whole thing was cooked up to make it look sinister that he was killed in the bedroom. But I don't know how they can prove he was killed in the bedroom. And then if you go to the gun, they found the gun several months later out at Lake Mead. And if you go out to Lake Mead, there was a place called Pyramid Island. It's all exposed now because there's no water in there anymore. But I mean, back in the day, it was full. And scuba divers used to go out there and practice. And when I first went out there was in early 2015. There was signs out there that said, if you're out here scuba diving, put up your flags, that kind of thing. And so I went and found a ranger. I said, were these things up in 1994, 95? He said, oh yeah, man, they've been there forever because this is a popular place for these scuba schools. They take people out there to teach them to scuba dive. So whoever disposed of the gun, they threw it out there by this Pyramid Island. And they said it was about 15 feet of water. It was wrapped up in like 15 plastic bags and then had rubber band around it. And
that's the part that got me. It was like, why would someone who's disposing of a gun dispose of it in a place that's frequented by scuba divers? And also, why would you wrap the gun up to preserve it of sorts and to, make it kind of available? So that kind of started to add up as to maybe someone is trying to frame Margaret for this murder, because she that gun was one of the guns that Ron owned at his home. And so it just seemed like, maybe there was someone, trying to kind of maybe paint this picture. The last thing that I thought was pretty interesting in this case was that Ron's car, I believe it was a Cadillac, he usually kept in pristine condition.
Yes.
Was found at a local strip club, outside of the local strip club. And inside of it, they had 3 sets of footprints that were not only his, but were someone else's that were in the car. And so this kind of led to, just some questions about, what possibly happened. We know that he was in the midst of doing some land deals out in the Charleston area, Mount Charleston area. And so it very much so could have been that there were other factors and involved in there. What do you think about that, Greg?
Yeah, I think so. That the footprints in the car is a big deal because when I first looked at the case, it never really hit me that much about there's like the driver's seat and then the other seats, the passenger seat and the 2 seats in the back of the car, they all had footprints there. And that was a big deal to people that heard about the case later on, but I don't think it was brought up in the trial that much. But it's an interesting fact. And why was the car at the Crazy Horse too? His couple of friends that he had, they said, well, he would never go to a place like that. But then we've heard other rumors that are difficult to confirm so many years later, 25 years later, but that he was, frequented that place. But they can't account for, and that was a mobbed up place. I mean, the guy who owned it back then, he's in prison now. I think he's still in prison. And actually the person who found the car was the security guard for the prison. He's a former Metro cop who was working with Tony Spilotro and those mobsters back in the day, feeding them information about what Metro Intelligence was doing, following the mob around and everything. Well, he got busted and then he, obviously got out of the police business, but he started working for this mobster, in the Crazy Horse too. He's the one that found the car. And he reported it to his son, who actually was a Metro officer at the time, which this is all kind of crazy, but that's how they found the car, and they impounded it and took it in. And they said they couldn't really find much more evidence, but I'm not sure the search there was done properly. But and then going back to the gun, they can't ever place that gun in Margaret's hand. They can't place Margaret at Lake Mead to dispose of the gun. And certainly you're exactly right when you talked about it looked like someone wanted to preserve the gun. Why else would they do it and throw it in a place where it's frequented by scuba divers? It's like they almost wanted it to be found or something. And the reason the scuba divers picked it up is because they testified that it's their typical practice. If they see trash at the bottom of the lake and they can reach it, they'll go down and pick it up and bring it up with them. And that's what they were doing. And then they found out, man, it's a gun. But another interesting thing about the gun is they say it was the murder weapon. I'm not convinced it was the murder weapon, because when they found Ron's skull, okay, when we earlier talked about they found his body out by the Lake Mojave. Well, his skull was intact. The rest of his body was burned up and cremated, but his skull was intact. All the teeth were in it. There was like a burn scar on the side, but that was it. But he had 4 bullet holes in his head, and they found bullet fragments in there. That's what they called them, bullet fragments. If you look at the autopsy report, they recovered bullet fragments, not bullets, but bullet fragments. And then one of the detectives was talking before the trial, saying that they would never be able to identify the weapon who fired those bullets because the bullets were too fragmented. But then later, during the grand jury proceedings, after the gun was found, all of a sudden they matched up these bullets to this gun. And the other weird thing is, and I've talked to police officers, different police departments across the country, it's not uncommon for people to find guns and turn them into the police. I was kind of surprised, but it doesn't probably happen every day, but it happens more than you think it would. Someone may find a gun laying out in the curb or somewhere like that, and they'll call the police and, or turn it in or whatever. And so the first thing they always do is they look up the serial number, see if they can identify the owner of the gun. Well, that's not what happened in Ron's case. The gun got turned in to Metro Police. They did some test firings of it, and then they just filed it away. They never bothered to look to see who it belonged to, which I think is unbelievable. And then later, this guy thinks, oh, we found a gun, and maybe it's the Ron Rudin case, and then it just all magically happens. So it's crazy.
A lot of sketchy factors when it comes to this case. A lot of sketchy factors. One of the things that I think, just overall just kind of just stands out to me is that it really, to me, just as a person who, would watch a lot of, true crime stuff, cases, even watch a lot of crime movies, it sounded like a mob hit to me, just in terms of the shooting in the back of the head, the car, vehicle. We knowing that, Las Vegas is a hub for organized crime. It had that kind of thing, even with the idea of this land, deal that Ron wanted to make. It just kind of led up to a lot of different things that could point in that direction. And so it just really overall seemed to be, pretty wild in terms of the case. What are your thoughts just in terms of lessons learned from a case like this? We understand that Margaret did serve 20 years for this case. You were able to help her case to get vacated. Summarizing it, looking at overview of this whole case, what are some lessons that can be learned?
I think the first lesson is that if you're charged with a serious crime, don't talk to the police. Get an attorney first and don't mess around. If you go and talk to the police, you're not doing yourself any favors. You can always have your attorney, even if you're innocent, because the cops. I was watching a true crime show the other day, and the cops were talking about, well, the first thing he wanted to do is go talk to his lawyer. And I'm thinking, oh, you mean to go exercise his constitutional right? And let me tell you something. When a police officer, and I've represented police officers, so I've represented, I've sued them also, but I've been on both sides of the fence with police officers, and I have great respect for good police officers. But let me tell you something. When a police officer gets involved in the shooting, they usually have rules that say they have 24 to 48 hours cooling off period before they have to say anything about what happened. But if you're involved in a case and they think you're a suspect, they don't give you 24 or 48 hours to try to cool off. So you better make your own 24 hours cool off period or whatever by saying, I'm not talking, I want my lawyer. That's the number one thing. And I can't reiterate that enough, because people, even if you're innocent, you're better off going to get a lawyer, because then a lawyer can convey the information to the police or do what the lawyer thinks is best. So that's number one. Number two, don't hire a clown to represent you at a trial. If your attorney is doing things like, one of the things that really disturbed me about the case was they did 48 hours, I think is that CBS or one of them. They did a show on her case back in 2001, I think, when the trial was going on. And so they were at the attorney's office before the trial was starting. This was like the week leading up to the trial. And they have cameras in the office and they're talking to them and they're doing all this stuff. And I'm thinking, I don't, if it's a trial coming up, I'm not going to have a bunch of people in my office because I don't have time to deal with that stuff. All I'm thinking about is the trial. Even if it was a little small claims court case, you know what I'm saying? You got a trial coming up. At least me, I kind of get tunnel vision. You have to focus on it. And if you're having TV people, you're going out and doing interviews and doing all this stuff right before your trial starting. To me, that's a signal right there that something's not right. So this guy, he was concerned more about his appearance on TV more than anything else, didn't think about his client. And you can, I won't mention any names here, but we all know there's some lawyers down in LA, especially, who like to get on TV on every case they can find. They just pop up on TV. And sometimes you might ask, have they ever won a case? But, because some of them really haven't, but that's another thing. You want an attorney who's going to be concerned about your case, because that's what you're paying them for. And if you don't have the money to pay them, if you get someone like in the public defender's office, they're not usually that way. They usually work hard. They're just overworked. But you need to get a good attorney. And the other thing is, if you get convicted in a criminal case by a jury, it's damn near impossible to get it overturned, even if you're innocent. Just talk to the people at the Innocence Project. They'll tell you, a DA's often fight, like, let's say there's some evidence and there was a scarf involved in a rape case or something, and they have it and it never was tested for anything. And you're a defense attorney and you go say, oh, well, let's see if there's any DNA on that scarf. Can we get it tested? The district attorney's office will often fight you on it. And I've always said, what's the problem? Just let it go get tested. Sometimes it backfires on the defendant. It comes back and says, oh, no, that's your stuff there. So, that's the kind of thing that I've learned is like, man, you've really got to pay attention to the trial process. I mean, you can't screw around. I mean, it's important. Got to challenge, and I'm not. These are not insights that I've providing for anybody that no one else has ever thought of. It's just me. I've done criminal trials and stuff before. I'd never done a criminal appeal until this case. But so I never really worried about appeals that much, except for trying to protect the record during a trial. But boy, I learned this was a learning experience for me, I'll tell you.
So, Greg, this is it's been great. You kind of have segued us into one of the reasons that we're here. You talked about TV, and we know that the this episode, Ron Rudin Murder, is going to be airing Tuesday, March 21st at 10 p.m. on CNBC. And then it's going to re-air again on Saturday, the 25th at 10 p.m. on the Oxygen Network. And so we want everybody to tune in. This was one of the wildest cases that I've ever had to produce. And when I heard about it, it just kept layers and layers and layers of just interesting factors that just kept coming up. What was your experience like filming for this particular show? I always like to get the perspective of the interviewees. What was your perspective like filming for the Blood and Money show? This is a Dick Wolf production. It's a pretty big deal. First time that they're doing true crime. What was the experience like for you?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not trying to suck up or anything, but I was really impressed with you because you knew about the case when you were asking good questions. Because when this case was going on, all the years I had the case, I never heard anybody from the media. I think someone from the paper called me one day and said, what's the status? I said, I don't know the status because we're waiting for the court. And that was it until they found out she was getting out. Then I got calls from everybody you can think of. Probably 3/4 of people were crazy. People telling me they're producers or they're doing this movie or something, and I just learned pretty quick that most of that's just a bunch of BS, I think. But, and they didn't know about the case or they, that kind of thing. You were prepared. You knew about the case. So you knew what kind of questions to ask. And so I appreciated that. And so are some of the other guys that were there that I met and stuff. And so I was impressed by the way y'all were prepared. I think that's a big key to at least know about the case before you try to do something, about it.
Well, I received that compliment. Thank you very much. There is a lot that goes into really trying to make sure that you create a accurate series. You're fair to all the parties that are involved. We try to do fair and balanced reporting. So there's a significant process that goes on in terms of the research, and it's not just myself as a producer. We have a research team. We have supervising producers. You have executive producers, everybody on the editing staff, and all that goes into it. My job is to, be able to contact the interviewees and to deliver the questions that will get the information out of them that we can use then to be able to edit the show. The show is going to be great. I saw some early copies of it. I'd love to get your opinion once you kind of take a look at it. But I think that once again, this will be a story that people will be talking about. Our true crime folks, they're really into it. This true crime whole genre I've watched within the last 5 years just really just blow up. And so would love to just see, what your thoughts are on it. And then also want to be able to just, thank everybody that was involved with it. And we'll go on to the next story. But appreciate your time, Greg. Thank you very much. Tell us about anything that you want to say. Is there any cases that you're working on now? Let's say people do want to get in contact with you. Do you have any social media handles? How could someone who might feel that they have a great case for you, how could they get in contact with you?
Oh, they can contact. I'm not into social media, so I don't have any Facebook or anything like that. And it just kind of I've just never got, I kind of got into it at first, but it didn't kind of creep me out on Facebook. So I just canceled it kind of like 10 or 15 years ago. It was a long time ago. So I don't really get on those, but my email is Greg at lawmgm.com. You can send me an email there. And like I said, I'm in Fresno, but one thing I appreciate about you doing the show was that, you can tell by looking at me, I'm not a media savvy guy. I don't know what the hell I'm doing on TV
You
or
look
all this
great,
kind of
Greg.
stuff.
You look great.
But y'all did a great job of not intimidating me and all that kind of stuff. And I just wish y'all could put a skinny lens on that camera to, and maybe some hair lens on there too. But other than that, I enjoyed the process. I thought it was kind of fun. But it's a crazy case. Anybody who's interested in looking at it, you can go online and there's, I think probably a bunch of stuff about Margaret on there, but the case is just crazy. But fortunately she's out now. She's almost going to be 80 here pretty soon. And she doesn't have to report to parole anymore. She's free. And so I'm glad that's the end result. I'm just sorry, but it took so long.
Yeah, 20 years. It's a lot of time to be incarcerated, particularly if you're innocent. I mean, it's just wrongful convictions happen all the time.
I can't even imagine being innocent and being incarcerated, especially knowing. Well, I know you probably want to end this thing, but this is one thing that always bothered me about the case. Like when you get tired, you're sitting around reading cases all the time and reading all this stuff. And, there's times you get tired and you think, I'm pretty tired. And then I think, well, she's sitting in a prison, probably with a fluorescent light or something shining in her face right now. I think I can go on a little bit more. But the participants in this case, like her lead trial attorney, he got to go home for Christmas. He got to do all his stuff. Meanwhile, she's in prison because of what he didn't do. And he even tried to defend himself later, saying, I did a good case and all this kind of stuff, instead of falling on his sword and saying, I'm sorry, I screwed up, do whatever you got to do, but she should get a new trial, that kind of thing. Those are the kind of things that get it. And now she did get an order for a new trial from a Nevada district court judge. I think it was in 2007. But the Nevada Supreme Court overturned that because they said she didn't file her papers in time. But just imagine, Margaret, you're in there. By that time, she'd been in prison for 6 or 7 years. And then she gets an order for a new trial. And then imagine the elation. And then, 60 days later, you get an order from the Nevada Supreme Court overturning it and saying, no, too bad, so sad, you didn't file your stuff in time. I mean, that emotional roller coaster to me would be difficult to imagine. I mean, I can't even imagine that. So
we heard so many reports of just inappropriate behavior by this attorney. And, we know he was doing a lot of interviews, and, there was partying going on. It was, definitely, just insufficient, representation on the part. And it's sad that, someone has to be the victim of that. You're already a victim of a, murder to your husband, and then you get, counsel that doesn't is ineffective. And so, can only imagine what Margaret has been through. Glad that she is out now, but this is another example of injustice that happens in this country far, far too often. So just wanted to say thank you, Greg. Any last comments or anything that you just wanted to say?
I don't think so, but I enjoyed working with you on the case, and it'll be interesting to see the show. But just I hope this opens up awareness for people to see that the justice system does have problems, and if you have money, you're better off, no doubt about it. And I used to not think that was the case, but I've been practicing law now for 30-something years, and if you have money, you have a better shot at prevailing at trial. And I think about all the people that have been charged with crimes that are innocent, or the charges have been overblown. A lot of people plead guilty to crimes because the DA piles a bunch of charges on them, and they think, well, man, I'm 25, maybe I ought to serve 10 years instead of going to trial and risking it, that kind of thing. And they may be innocent of some of them, but they plead that way. So there's a lot of injustice in that regard in the plea process also. And so I just think people should be more aware of the disparities in the justice system. And I think, and I hope attorneys, when they see a case that they think they can do it, that they try to jump in and do something about it. Because it's like if you drive down the road and you see someone injured on the side of the road, are you just going to keep driving? Or are you going to pull over and say, hey, and you can't save the whole world, but in a situation like that, if you think you could do something, I hope more people would try to get involved and try to reform the system. But,
Well, Greg, I just want to say commending you. You're one of those people that, have definitely proved to help out. And we thank you for that. And just want to commend you on your service. And so with that, we'll conclude. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
This is Rap Sheet Hollywood. Make sure you tune in Tuesday, March 21st. You got to check it out on CNBC at 10 p.m. And then also the re-airing on Oxygen Network Saturday, March 25th at 9 p.m. So you guys tune in, check it out, and Rap Sheet Hollywood, and we are out. Thank you.
See ya.
All right.
Okay.